Hi, I'm Tracy Rodez. Today I will be doing my midterm project for Intro to Criminal Justice, CCJ 1020. Today I will be talking about how the realities of the American prison system, like what it's like to live there and how it affects American society. Okay, sorry, it wasn't clicking. Not very technology oriented, so bear with me, please. I first want to start off by distinguishing the two terms, jails and prisons. They're often used interchangeably with each other in like movies and TV shows, but in reality, they mean like two separate, distinct things. Jails is a confinement. Jail is a confinement facility where people stay while they wait for their sentencing, while a prison is a facility for those people who have already received their sentence and the court has proven them to be criminals, they have proven them to be guilty. As a rule, jails are usually run by local law enforcement, and there's usually only one level of security. On the other hand, prisons are much more strict in the way that they are run and the way that they are protected. They are run by the state and the federal government, and some prisons are even run by private companies that make an agreement, but there's a lot more security in prisons than in a jail. So I want to start off by talking about mass incarceration. The United States is the world's leader in incarceration. According to the NAACP, despite making only 5% of the world's population, the US has nearly 25% of the world's prison population. So we're not the biggest country in the world. Obviously, there's China, there's India, there's other countries that I can't really think about right now that have more people than we do. Actually, I think it was just those two countries, but I'm sorry. But we are not the biggest country in the world. That's the bottom line that I'm trying to get at here. But we have a quarter of our population locked up. There was a 500% increase over the last 40 years. It is said that for every 100,000 people, 655 people are inmates. So the American criminal justice system holds 2.3 of its population in state prisons, federal prison, juvenile correctional facilities, local jails, and immigration detention facilities. So to me, the question that comes next is how did this happen, you know? I first started off with the war on drugs in my research. The war on drugs was a global campaign led by the US federal government of drug prohibition, military aid, and military intervention. This campaign was set off in the hopes of reducing the illegal drug trade in the United States. There were several initiatives set in place of drug policies that were intended to discourage the production, the distribution, the consumption of drugs, and we were the face of that campaign. And several other countries like agreed with us, and they were like, okay, we'll get along. Well, you know, we'll be by you and stuff. So the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses increased from 41,000 in the 1980s to 450,000 in 2017. So yeah, that there was an increase there because of this campaign, and those numbers only seem to continue to increase, not only on drugs, but just in people incarcerated in general. Because one person is sentenced to a prison every 90 seconds in the United States. So that's a lot. As for the conditions in prisons, obviously, as there are so many people in prison that the conditions have begun to deteriorate. I'm gonna move myself a little. Okay. I first want to talk about escalating violence. Prison officials have a legal duty under the 8th Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from using excessive force and to protect prisoners from assault by other prisoners and obviously themselves. Um, Officers are not supposed to use malicious or sadistic intent to cause harm, but they may use force, and good efforts to keep order. Um, that's another topic, but I digress. And unfortunately, that is just not the case where officers have upheld that right. Facilities nationwide are failing to meet the fundamental duty of protecting incarcerated people. The U.S. Department of Justice found that Alabama's prisons are one of the most violent in the nation. There's a study done by the Equal Justice Initiative that found that homicide, sexual abuse are extremely common. Knives and dangerous drugs are rampant in that prison. Incarcerated people are extorted, threatened, stabbed, raped, and even tied up for days without guards noticing. Additionally, they found that a prison called St. Clair, for every 100,000 people incarcerated, 300 people were killed. So, there's just this like massive distinction of like what's happening, what's being done, in reality in order to protect them, to protect inmates, to protect prisoners, Um, and the conditions are only worsen, honestly, because the number of incarcerated people has grown alongside mental illnesses. Um, and that was badly worded, but people who commit crimes usually they um, not all the cases are the same, of course, but most of the time it's because they have an illness and they just committed a crime, and so they're in prison, and more than half of Americans in prisons have a mental illness, and there is more than 6,000 people in the U.S. are held in solitary confinement. Prison officials have often failed to provide appropriate treatment for people whose behavior is difficult to manage. Instead of resorting to physical force, they usually turn to solitary confinement, and people are being held in cells for 23 hours a day, and they're only allowed out for showers or brief exercise or medical visits, and like they're denied calls from their family and visits. They can't have anyone, it's just them. And that study shows, by the Equal Justice Initiative again, shows that people who are held in long-term solitary confinement suffer from anxiety, paranoia, disturbances, depression, and the suicide rate alongside that number has increased as well because they're alone, obviously. Um, Now I'm going to talk about the abuse in the prison system. Of course, with mismanagement and defective policies and dangerous practices, sexual abuse and violences in prison has grown immensely in the past years. Prison rape victims have faced painful repercussions such as physical wounds, STDs, and psychological harm, and there's no support or sufficient psychological or medical treatment, and many, unfortunately, have to suffer in silence. There was a former inmate that said that rape and sexual assaults were so basic to the American prison system and compared them to bars and bunk beds. And the Equal Justice Initiative released the results of an investigation. From 2009 to 2011, 6 correctional officers were convicted for criminal sexual abuse of incarcerated women, but only one faced more than 5 days in jail. And especially in modern society, this is astonishing because of the Me Too movement. It has matured so much in recent years, and there are many inmates that are being excluded from that opportunity to share their stories. You know, these people are still people, regardless of what they may have done, I believe. You know, I don't think anyone deserves to to be abused, and it's just very heartbreaking. There are several women of the Me Too movement that are attempting to bring prisoners into the conversations by publishing letters from them who are still being detained and including them in media coverage. And I think that's very um, not wholesome, I would say, in a way, because we need to have that, we need to see that, you know, um, we need to face our reality, I believe. And now we're gonna move on to enriching corporations. Essentially, this is when private companies can take advantage of people in private prisons. And, you know, private detention companies are paid a set fee per inmate a night as they negotiate contracts, you know, as they, you know, create more steps to, you know, get more incentives from government officials. Sorry. And they basically privatize like everything in this system of like from entering the prison to like leaving it. And you know, profits can come from charging high fees for services like GPS ankle monitoring, drug testing, phone and video calls, and even healthcare. um you know, and there's like this um there is this argument that private companies are cheaper and they're not like so heavy on the average taxpayer, but it's not true because we're still people are still being taxed even if it's private. And you know, it's still something that's so multifaceted that it's like they're being taken advantage of even more by making money off of someone who, you know, is just trying to serve their sentence. And so after everything that I've talked about abuse and violence and corporations and, you know, being denied treatment. There's this question that I wanted to ask, which are prisons even beneficial? And, you know, the answer in simple is no, at least not in the Americans in American society. One person is sentenced to a state or federal prison every 90 seconds in the United States. I know I already talked about that, but it was just so shocking to me. That study was actually done by David J. Harding, which is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Michigan. You know, and he released a study that showed that of that the safety that imprisonment buys is really little. You know, they might provide opportunities for rehab, you know, education and counseling, but at the very end of everything, you know, prison is a very horrible, you know, place that many people, when they're released, they fall back into committing crimes and they're usually sent back to prison because they just, you know, face more trauma in prison and just can't break that cycle. Um, so now I'm going to also talk about how kids can suffer because half of the number of prisoners in the United States, they're also parents. And children whose parents are involved in the criminal justice system suffer a lot, obviously. You know, prisoners could be isolated from their friends and their family, and it just leaves like this gap for the children's. They suffer from a psychological strain and antisocial behavior. They can be suspended and expelled from school. They suffer economic hardships, and they're 6 times more likely to be involved in criminal activity, according to the NAACP. And it's just very shocking because, of course, we're talking about prisoners, but it also affects, the people who are close to them, because those children are often left without anyone around them. They usually have to go into social care or into the care of someone older, like a grandparent or a family member, but it's just not the same. So after everything that was just piling on, I was like, how is there even a way that this could be like fixed, Because lately there's been this whole thing where we have to redo everything and just throw everything out and start from scratch. And I personally believe that there does need to be change from the system. There's a lot of things that need to be reinforced and, just change, honestly, because our our Americans our prison system is not the best. Regardless of what these people may have done, they're still at the end of the day people. So I want to talk about how Norway's prison system is actually one of the best in the world. It wasn't always the best, but you know, it has operated with the same principles as Americans, like which was emphasizing punishment and security. But there are there was a sharp turn from to rehab in the 1988, and there was a further shift in 2007 with an emphasis on helping inmates like reacclimate again to society once they leave. They help them find their jobs and find homes even before their release. And that that shift, I guess you can say, that distinction between the American prison system and Norway's prison system is one that's really it's very clear in my eyes, at least for me personally, after doing this research, because, when people leave the American prison system, they usually end up going back. But in Norway's case, they're given an opportunity to get better. They're given an opportunity to reacclimate to society and to get a job and to be with their family once again and just be functioning normal. And I truly think that there should be a shift on in that in that area. And so I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I These are all my citations. I hope you have a good day, and thank you so much for listening.